One of the teams that was ravaged by injuries early in the NBA season was the Orlando Magic, and they just got good news that Paolo Banchero is preparing to return to the court as early as Friday. We're going to talk about it all and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago, for everything NBA related. I'm the host here, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, we got a major update. Paolo Banchero is expected to be cleared from his oblique injury, and he's expected to return to the court as early as Friday, January 10th against the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, they said that he could return Thursday. That's tomorrow against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So either Thursday or Friday, Paolo Banchero will be back on the court for the Orlando Magic. And he's been sidelined since October 30th, and he suffered an injury against the Chicago Bulls, interestingly enough. And so he's been out for 2 months, has Paolo Banchero. And listen, you got to give credit for how the Orlando Magic been able to stay afloat. They lost him, they lost Franz, they lost Mo, they lost so many players, but still the Orlando Magic find themselves at fourth in the Eastern Conference at 22-16, and they still have a 2-game lead against the Milwaukee Bucks, who are currently the number 5 seed, and they're only 2.5 games back of the New York Knicks for the number 3 seed, and 5.5 games back of the Boston Celtics for the number 2 seed. Now, I doubt they catch up with the Celtics or the Cleveland Cavaliers, but getting Paolo Banchero back for this Orlando Magic team can be huge for them. This is something that, listen, I said when he went down, if they could just stay afloat until Paolo came back. Now, that's when they were going to have Franz, right? I didn't expect they would lose Franz Wagner and then still be able to stay afloat in the way that they have. But the Orlando Magic are an extremely well-coached team. They execute. The defense has been sound for the entire season, for multiple seasons at this point. And so they've been able to use that to more than stay afloat. I just wanted to see the Orlando Magic stay and see if they can avoid the play-in. They've more than done that, right? They don't even really at a risk of falling out the play-in, and getting him back now healthy for this team. Jalen Suggs has stepped up during his absence. Other players have stepped up. We saw a big game from Tristan Da Silva over the course of this time period. Anthony Black's had a big game over the course, but now you're going to get your ace back. You're going to get Paolo back. You're going to get him back to be able to be the anchor of that team and to build off of what you're already doing sound defensively. And then you're going to be able to weather the storm further, and you're still going to get Franz back before the end of the season as well. So that could be really big for this team overall. And you just look at what this means for this Orlando team and for the Eastern Conference as a whole, things are going to start getting fun. So, you look at teams like the Philadelphia 76ers, who've been ravaged by injury. The Dallas Mavericks are going through it now with Luka Doncic, right? They've lost a number of games in a row. All these things that have happened to these teams that have suffered major injuries. But the Orlando Magic, for the most part, even throughout missing Paolo and Franz, has been able to just get enough wins. They haven't really gone on an extremely long losing streak over this time period at all. You look at the most games that they lost in a row was 3 from December 10th to December 19th. But other than that, the Orlando Magic have only had back-to-back losses once, December 26th and December 27th. So that's a big thing for that team. They went on that initial 5-game slide after Paolo went down, but then they found their rhythm, they found their momentum, and they just have been able to keep it going since then. So the Orlando Magic get Franz back, and we're going to be able to see how that shakes out for this team, and if how much further they can now push it. They're getting him back with more than half the season left to go. They still got more than enough time to get some momentum, get him in gear, get him ramped back up. And then when Franz comes back, you're getting another boost in the arm on top of that. So this is a major thing when it comes down to it. And we'll see if it ends up shaking out, man. We'll see if it ends up shaking out. But with that said, that's not the only topic. This is the daily episode today for NBA Central. This is just the lead topic. But shout out to Paolo. Glad he's coming back. We'll see what the Magic are a really fun, exciting young team. And while they may not make a move at this year's trade deadline, if they do something going forward, decide to in this offseason after seeing how things shake out, they're one player growth or a star joining this team away from being a contender in that Eastern Conference At least I feel. But listen, you guys can let me know, as always, how you feel on all that down below. But let's get into the next topic for today. So Zion Williamson made his return to the court yesterday, and many people are saying, did Zion silence his doubters? Did he do this? Did he do this? Listen, Zion looked great. But we know that Zion Williamson can look great when he actually is on a basketball court. That's not the question, and that's not the thing that's really plaguing what the Pelicans have to ask and decide on what to do for the future, of Zion Williamson. But 22 points, he was plus 8, 9 to 15 from the field, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, 1 block. He did have 4 turnovers, but overall, Zion came back to the court and looked like Zion Williamson. You look at the way he's able to finish, the touch he has, it's like a guard. All that's out there for Zion is great, right? We know what Zion Williamson can be when he's on the basketball court. That's not the question, though. And so many people have now been asking, do the Pelicans, because it seems like they're going to have a hard time finding a trade suitor for him, should they just keep him? And that's an interesting conversation to have, right? Because here's the thing that I think that you can keep Zion, right? Because you're on pace to have a lottery pick in a deep draft. You own your own first round pick, so you're going to have a lottery pick. You have the chance to really reset the deck with a really good young talent to add to this team, to add to Trey Murphy, to add to Herb Jones, to add to these players that you have here. But I think the question when it comes down to it is should he be the player that they're building around going forward? That's the biggest question here for this New Orleans Pelicans team, at least in my opinion. If you keep Zion, great. You have the option to get out. He has a out clause in his contract every single summer, so they can make that decision. But if you keep Zion on this team, that doesn't mean you have to build around him. And I think that's the place that the Pelicans, that's the more interesting conversation to have here. Yes, if they can trade Zion and get something back, great. I don't think that's going to happen. Yes, they can end up waiving and use his non-guaranteed clause to get out of that contract. But I think it's something to be said that where the Pelicans are right now, right? And where they have the chance to really, like I said, add a really good young talent in this upcoming draft. You look at right now, if the season were to end, the Pelicans have the second best odds in the lottery to land the number 1 overall pick. And they're in a similar situation when they decide to move on from Anthony Davis, right? So I think in this, right, if you're able to keep Zion and the player that you draft fits well next to Zion, but if you want to shift to start building around that player, that's probably the best decision, the route to go. So that way, and when you have Zion healthy, great. He's an additive, right? He can help, of course, take some pressure off the young players you're developing, all those type of things. But I think overall, the question that the Pelicans need to ask themselves now isn't about if you keep Zion, because the trade market may dictate that for you. How do you move forward, even if Zion's on your roster, and how do you mitigate the risk of Zion Williamson potentially going down for you again? That's the conversation that the Pelicans should be having, at least in my opinion. And for what it's worth, Zion said this yesterday in regards to trade rumors. At the end of the day, control the things you can control and accept the things you can't. As a professional, the only thing I can do is come into work every day, work hard, have fun. And at the end of the day, I feel like we get to play basketball for a living. I love hooping. It was definitely good to be back out there. It was good to see my teammates competing. The Timberwolves started out hot, but nobody was really bothered by it. Everybody was like, nah, we good. Stick with this, with what we do. And so, listen, I love hearing that from Zion, say that he loves hooping. But I think that when you look at Zion, some of the questions around him is, does he truly love basketball like that, right? And is that why he has a problem staying motivated, staying in the gym, keeping up with his workout regimen, those type of things? That's one of the questions that's here. But at the end of the day, man, I think the Pelicans, and whatever happens between the Pelicans and Zion, it's going to end up working itself out, whatever the results end up being. It's just that the Pelicans hold the cards. And I think that when you look at it, they were very smart in the way that they built Zion's contract, with the fact that they have an opt-out clause basically in every summer before the season starts. That's one of the more unique deals you're going to find in the NBA, and it shows that a team was at least thinking about, hey, can we really make can we really afford to give him a fully guaranteed contract? And the fact of the matter is, no, they couldn't. And it's been proven now by the way that this thing has gone with Zion Williamson. But overall, you always hope that there's going to be that it's going to work out, that he's going to be able to stay healthy. Because I tell you what, when Zion's on the basketball court, there's really no doubt about what he can do, right? Of course, he has his limits like every player does. There's no perfect player in the NBA. But when he's on the basketball court, he's special. That's why he was the talent and looked at as the prospect that he was coming into the league. It's just about if he can stay healthy. And that's a big question here. Can he stay healthy? Will he stay healthy? And are the Pelicans really ready to take on that risk? That's one of the biggest questions here. We got Rob Immortal Beast in the building says the Pelicans are like the 76ers of the Western Conference. If Zion can't stay healthy, the team is going to struggle for the most part. Listen, I think in a lot of ways it's worse, right? Because Embiid has been considerably more healthy than Zion Williamson when you really look at it over the last few years. They both have, questions of being healthy in the playoffs. But you're right. I mean, the Pelicans are going to be one of the biggest what ifs, right? And when you look at that team being ready and willing to really blow up their roster, it just comes down to it didn't work. And a big part of why that roster did not work either is because of Zion Williamson not being able to stay healthy. That team was built to help Zion. And for what the Pelicans have been able to do over the last few years with Zion being in and out of the lineup, it's commendable, to be honest with you. But at the same time, you still got to find it. You got to find your way. You got to find your path going forward. And what that looks like for the Pelicans, we'll see. Now, last topic of the day before we get out of here. This one comes from Tim Bontemps, who mentioned that he was asked, how many stars get moved other than Jimmy Butler? And Tim Bontemps said, none. And that's not the first time that we've kind of heard something that alludes to the fact that it may not be a lot of big names or big contracts moved around the NBA this offseason. A big part of that is due to the second tax apron. A big part of that also is due to the teams being more protective of their draft capital with how deep this draft looks like it's going to be. And some of the other contenders are the teams that you would typically look at to make big deals have either made ones in prior years that they're being a little bit more protective, a la the Lakers, right? The Lakers have 2 first-round picks that they can move, but reportedly they're only willing to move 1 because they realize they can't keep giving up future assets for the ceiling of what this team could be, right? And you have other teams that have made moves and made trades that either they regretted, but they included picks. And so this is leading up to this trade deadline potentially being a fairly quiet trade deadline. And not to say that that's going to be a bad thing. I think when you look at the new CBA and the impact that it's having on these teams, it's making teams realize we cannot play willy-nilly with our money, right? You had teams that were willing to spend the luxury tax, and they were willing to do that because it was only so penalizing. You just had to pay more money on your tax bill. Now you look at it. You can't aggregate salaries. You lose exceptions, so you can't even add players that are willing to take less to come to play to your team once you're in that second tax apron. And you can't trade multiple players in any trade, much less combine smaller salaries for a larger one. And so as we move forward into this trade deadline, while there's been a lot of rumors about players like Bradley Beal, players like Jimmy Butler, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, De'Aaron Fox, you may see a trade deadline where And I think this was rumored earlier in the season from Mark Stein, where you may not see contracts over $20-25 million moved at this trade deadline because of the teams really understanding now the implications of what this new CBA really means for these teams. And that's going to be something that I know there are a lot of contingent of NBA fans that trade season is the most exciting season for them because they love talking about the rumors, talking about the possible deals, hoping that their team's going to make a move that's going to change their trajectory. And right now, what we're seeing is that may just not be the case this year at the trade deadline. It may end up just being that you see some smaller moves. You see some smaller role players move to add to teams, a la the Lakers going after Walker Kessler, right? Those type of things. And that just may be what you see. And if that is, it's the owners and GMs just learning from if they cannot risk limiting the forward mobility or latitude that their team has to improve by making a deal and going all in too soon, right? And that's the risk that a lot of these teams are at right now, and that's what they're trying to avoid. So, we'll see what happens when it comes down to that. I think overall, the Jimmy Butler trade, if Bradley Beal waives that no trade clause, which we keep hearing kind of conflicting things, right? We've heard a couple of days ago that he would be willing to remove it for the Heat, the Lakers, and some other teams. And then it came out, his agent today, his agent said this, Bradley Beal's agent said, there have been no discussions about trades with the Suns or any other team. Bradley's total focus is on helping the Suns turn things around. Now, I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that, right? I'm not saying that his agent is going to, what is the agent going to come out and say? Yeah, my player's not my client's not ready to waive his no trade clause by any means necessary. He's not waiving that. There's not going to be a lot of things said on that part in that front of it. But I think that's kind of the domino that's waiting to fall here. If Bradley Beal were to choose to waive that no trade clause, whether it's a 3-team, a 4-team trade, whatever it is, I firmly believe that the Miami Heat would find a way to get a trade done. It just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And I don't even know if it should, to be 100% honest with you. So while everybody's kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen with the Jimmy Butler nonsense, I think when it comes down to it, like, we are shaping up for what could be an active trade deadline, but not active in the way that we've typically become to think about it. It's probably not going to be a lot of big names move. It may be a lot of role players, a lot of moving some contracts around, expirings for, players on deals and things like that. And I think that you're going to see teams protective of their cap space, whether it's cap space that they have now or a little bit of movement that they have next year in the free agent market if they don't make a big move now, or just protected of their draft assets. And so that can lead for a lot of the speculation around players that we thought were going to be moved to end up just staying where they are. And that may be the modus operandi for the next 2 years, actually, because when you look at it, 2026 is shaping up to be a pretty deep draft as well. And if teams that have to ask themselves, do we add a player and get closer to the second tax apron, or do we use the depth in this draft to draft somebody that we feel we can develop, and maybe they don't hit the heights of a player that we could trade for, but it's a cost control contract, and if we hit on that player, we'll have cost controlled money for the next 5 to 6 years, right? That's what teams are going to be more, and that's what the whole purpose of the new CBA. On top of adding parity around the league, it's also so that teams are more conscious of how they draft, or more conscious of how they develop talent in-house, or more conscious of how they invest their assets, right? That's the route that the league is going. We had the player empowerment movement, which is still in effect. See that via Jimmy Butler. But the next phase of what we may see for the NBA is teams just understanding how they need to be with their money, whereas before they may have been a little bit more willy-nilly with some of their money, or willy-nilly with draft assets, or all that be said. Now, I said that, right? And then you saw 5 first-round picks traded for Mikal Bridges, right? So you see stuff like that. There's always going to be a team that's really willing to buck the trends or look at the risk in the face and say, yeah, we're ready to take on that risk. If it means getting us closer to a title, we're willing to do whatever it takes. It's always going to be some of those teams. But I think right now GMs are kind of trying to fill out and they're really starting to understand just how restrictive this new CBA is, because it doesn't have as much leeway and as much give as prior CBAs. It just doesn't have that. And so that's going to be kind of the next phase that we're going to. 3-point shooting, of course, on the court, off the court. We're looking at GMs just kind of being more conscious and aware of their money, their assets, how they're spending, where they're drafting, where they're allocating. And hopefully a lot of teams come out on the better end of that, and fans have the fan bases of teams have a little bit more to look forward to, as their teams have to now, like, development. If you're a team that can develop, if you're a team that trusts your coaching staff, your development department, whatever you have to get the most out of talent, you're going to see those guys come at a premium right now. Because with the way that the league's going, you are going to want and need to be able to develop at a high level if you want to build something sustainable. So young teams like the Orlando Magic, young teams like the Houston Rockets, right? Young teams like the OKC Thunder, especially the Rockets and Thunder, have so many draft assets coming in the future as well. These are teams that, they may be willing to make a move to get a superstar, right? Or to a star if one becomes available in a deal that makes sense. But they're going to be able to do that because so much of their roster has been players that they were drafted or on rookie deals, or they just have that leeway, right? And that's kind of going to be the next phase of the NBA. But we'll talk about that kind of more in depth going forward. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything basketball related. And I'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video.